ski area.
Oh, Whistler?
Yeah, Whistler a few years ago. I drove all the way up there with those tapes because there was a guy from another club, not our club, another club, but he was very involved in the district at that time, and it was years after I was district governor, but he had heard about these tapes. I go up there to talk about art and these tapes, and you know, I got all of 5 minutes. I'll never forget it. It was...
So, hello, goodbye.
Oh yeah, it was that quick. Terrible.
Well, when we did, well, we are rolling, so we'll talk
Sure.
afterwards. So, we've got Bob Mallon here, and Bob, when did you join Tacoma Rotary?
I joined Tacoma Rotary May 13th, 1965, so my 43rd anniversary is due this May.
And how long before you were president?
I became president the year 72, 73. I might add, I came into the Rotary Club of Tacoma very reluctantly. And I told this story often when I was district governor because I thought it conveyed a message of the sincerity of Rotary and what it can do for an individual. And I'll never forget the greatest Rotarian I ever knew was Arthur Henry Wickens, our longtime secretary. And I remember Art saying how he saw so many men who went on to become president and their activities in Rotary that they just grew and developed professionally because of that Rotary experience. So that's so very true. But anyway, after my introduction, then I saw the potential of Rotary, and particularly if anybody is interested in creativity, I think it really brings it out because there you are with the complete cross-section, professionally and business-wise, of an entire community. This is true in any community, but of the entire community, and you readily realize how effective Rotary is and what it can accomplish.
So why did you join?
Well, I joined because the one who sponsored me, William R. Gregory, who was just the greatest guy of Nightville and Gregory, Bill, after about the third phone call, he was just very pragmatic, and he said, Bob, I think it would be very good for your business. And so I'll never forget, I went in and I talked to my dad about it, and I said, you know, our good friend Bill Gregory wants me to join Rotary. And of course, my dad was a longtime Kiwanian in South Tacoma, and he once wanted to propose me for the Kiwanis Club. But having gone away to a boarding high school and then away to college and then drafted into the Army, when I heard Rotary had a 60% attendance requirement, I felt I just do not need any compulsory things, so that's why I was not very excited. But I felt the way Bill had put it to me finally, in fairness to the business, I should talk to my dad about it, and I will never forget as long as I live because he is a very enthusiastic man, and he had his desk and he said, boy, if you can get into Rotary, that is just wonderful. He said, my great friend Charlie Reed. Charlie Reed was an old Ford dealer in Tacoma, and then Charlie, after his experiences as a dealer, then got into the construction business. But anyway, he and my dad were the greatest of friends, and he said, yes, when Charlie and I would travel, he would always make up his Rotary meetings, and I almost said, well, why didn't you make up your Kiwanis meetings?
But you thought not?
I thought I wouldn't embarrass him.
So after you joined, you were elected, or you served president 10 years later. So what were you doing in the meantime, and were you chair for a number of projects, other chairs? Oh,
yes, I was involved in committee work, and very early on they put me on the fellowship committee. It was probably one of my most memorable meetings as long as I live. I'll always recall it. And so there I am, very enthused about being in Rotary, and you know, you can develop ideas. So we had a fellowship committee meeting, the idea being how do we get particularly the newer Rotarians well known and have a little fun at the same time. You know, Art always said, you know, you got to have a little fun with this too. So anyway, I thought it might be fun. I had a 16mm camera, and I thought it might be fun to go about Tacoma and see Rotarians in their everyday vocational activity. And then we would have a mock trial at the meeting, which was in the Crystal Ballroom in those days. And we had a big screen and everything. So this whole thing was a put on. And so what we did in the gear shift, we said for this coming meeting, the Honorable Irving J. Miscalc will be coming out from the east to address the Rotary Club of Tacoma. And so the disguise was that this honorable judge was going to be the one who would sit in on judgment on the film, and then those pictures would be would be called up. And so I stood up at the lectern announcing the program and had to inform the club that the Honorable Irving J. Miscalc was a bit late, but I have somebody positioned at the door as soon as he arrived. The memorable thing, when I looked at the audience, here was our good member, Cleon Soul, and his son, Judge Soul of the Superior Court, was there in attendance because Cleon wanted his son to see this great jurist from the east who had come to our club or was en route to our club. Oh, I'll never forget that as long as I live. But anyway, I got to know a lot of people quickly.
Do you have that film still, or is that?
Oh, somewhere it's around, yeah. We had one of our greatest Rotarians, and he was suspicious as to what was going on, and so he did not give me a friendly wave with his hand. In fact, I was at a Rotary meeting many years ago, and I heard a woman, she was just very gifted from the Department of Transportation, and she ended the meeting by saying, "Now, when you go by our people on the highway, will you wave with the full hand?"
Oh, some people say that there's a difference in the fun that was had in Rotary like 30 or 40 years ago as opposed to what we have for fun today in Rotary. Do you think there was a difference, or what kind of fun did you guys have besides, did you do skits or anything, or just?
Oh, sure, they had various skits and things were pretty well planned out. I think from what little I've observed, it's far more spontaneity, you know, of getting the individual, him or her, up on their feet and then see what we can do that would provoke something. But I think in the years when I first became a member, the fellowship committee really did work at providing a program, which was the entirety of the meeting for fun and games, as opposed to in my early days, it was called the cougar head, you know, when they would find somebody and you'd put it into this old cougar head they had. But there have been some things, and when I was district governor, I pointed this out very seriously, and that is humor and fun are wonderful. They're great tools, but they can be a double-edged sword, and you've really got to be careful how you handle humor, because I've seen instances where humor has not been handled very well. It's injurious to the recipient of the humor, and you don't want that type of humor.
So what were some of your favorite projects, both in socials and community projects, and during the 60s?
Well, there were the usual things that so many of the Rotarians were involved in. The United Way, in those days we called it the United Good Neighbor Campaign, and then the year I was president of the United Good Neighbor Campaign, we changed the name to the United Way because United Way of America was embarked in a program to get all the local community organizations to change the name to the United Way. Then we had one was so memorable in my early venture into Rotary, and that was called Cindy the Elephant. And we were going to have an elephant out at the Tacoma Zoo. And so that was one of our projects, and I was on the committee to go raise money for Cindy the Elephant. And I always had a warm spot in my heart for Cindy, and a lot of my friends other than Rotarians used to kid me a lot about Cindy the elephant at the zoo at Point Defiance Park.
She was there for a number of years.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well, let's move into your year as president. Tell me about what you enjoyed most about your year as president and how it went at your individual meetings.
Well, Art used to forever kid me because I love humor and in good taste, and I would always try to come up with, maybe the latest joke, and Art used to say, they just defy you to make them laugh, and so I became a little bit known for my humor that didn't provoke the laughter that I wanted on some occasion, but nevertheless, it was fun. But the thing that I remember the most about my year, knowing that Art was going to celebrate his 50th anniversary as secretary of our club, and I had hours of interviews with him on tape about his development in Rotary, how he first heard about it, and Art was elected in 1953 at the International Convention in Paris, France, as the president of all the secretaries worldwide. And Art was one of the few secretaries that had ever become a district governor. He was district governor, now our 5020. He was district governor in 1959. And the best way to describe Art Wickens, he was a saintly man. And so knowing of this great event that was going to occur, I wanted to have something really big to honor this man. He was a very humble person, and I always had a feeling that Art never got the true recognition that he deserved. And so we're going to have kind of the crescendo would be the announcement of what we know today, the Rotary Club of Tacoma's Community Service Award. And I had commissioned an artist, a sculptor in Stillicum. Interestingly enough, Art lived in Stillicum, and I'm communicating with this company back in the New York, Connecticut area, Medallic Art Company, which strikes most of the presidential medallions. And I'm communicating with them, and in one of the letters they said, well, Mr. Mallon, I don't know where you're located in Tacoma, but it just so happens that we have an artist of ours who does a lot of work for us. She lives in the town of Stillicum. So when I went out and met with Chris Gregoire was her name, and I told her, I said, now, she was explaining to me how important sunlight is for sculpturing. And I said, well, do me a favor and make sure that you angle that so that Mr. and Mrs. Wickens do not walk by your home and see the clay model that you have up there. But anyway, that was a great evening that we had down at the old 565 Broadway Club in honor of Art's great service. And then we announced the Community Service Award, and then gave him the very first award.
Did he cry?
Oh yeah, I mean he was so moved, and he was such. Well, Art and Myrtle were just such special and wonderful people, but he never sought the limelight. He was just that perfect personality for that type of a job, but. That had to be the highlight of the year. And the beautiful thing about it was that all the past presidents at the time, they underwrote hiring the sculptor and getting this medallion struck. And I'll never forget, as long as I live, the meeting we had down at the Tacoma Club, and this was about the second or third meeting after I had proposed this and said this is how much each is going to have to contribute to this effort. And at one point, it was just stark silence. Nobody was moving, and I thought, wow, I don't think it's that big of an amount, and I assured them that they would get all their money back because that would all tie in with the great banquet that we were having for Art. And as long as I live, Dr. R. Franklin Thompson, he broke the ice. I can see Franklin sitting there at this meeting at the Tacoma Club, Nobody has said a thing when I've talked about Medallic Art of New York and how much money it's going to cost for this medallion to be struck. It's dead silence. Franklin looked up and said, "There is no more fitting thing to do than to cast the image of a person in bronze." It was a great display of what one statement can do to move a crowd, and then that got us off the road for the underwriting of the effort to have the medallion struck.
And so did you wipe your brow then?
Oh, did I ever? Yeah, I mean, I was just thrilled. But another interesting thing about the year in view of the period of time in American history, you might say, because of things going on in Washington, D.C., I taped every meeting my year. And it's ironic, having mentioned Franklin, there were 2 times that I couldn't conduct the meetings because I was very involved in our National Association and other activities. And so I asked somebody to tape the meetings for me, and then I asked one of the previous past presidents to run the meeting, and that's always difficult because there are some past presidents who got their nose out of joint because I didn't ask them. You know how it goes. And the irony of this is that the 2 meetings that were not taped were our own member, Dr. R. Franklin Thompson, when he was there to talk about the great University of Puget Sound, and the other meeting, ironically, was the then president of the great Pacific Lutheran University, Dr. Eugene Wigman, and those 2 programs, something happened with the guy who was running the machine for me, and we didn't get those programs, but I have all those programs, and you know, that's history of what it was like that particular year.
So we had a anti-collegiate person.
Apparently.
So you have all these tapes, are they on?
Oh, they're just the old cassette tapes, you know.
They're not
Yeah.
real though.
No, they're just old cassette tapes, you know, and all you have to do is run them off. And then I had a tape. It's too bad I didn't have you around the night of the big banquet for art, but I taped that evening as well.
I've heard it said that he was in Barbershop Quartet.
Oh yes, yeah. He was a great singer, and what a lot of people don't realize is the number of funerals and weddings that Art sang and didn't charge a thing for it, but just to help people. And that was one of the things that always struck me about here was this great community servant, if you will, and yeah, he was just very popular in the Tacoma area with the singing groups.
Well, didn't singing used to be a big portion of Rotary as well? Wasn't there some Rotary songbooks and so forth?
Oh, sure, yeah, Rotary songbooks, and they're still, you know, about in some places in the country, I'm sure. A lot of the small towns, I remember going to a makeup one time in Indiana and talk about the time tunnel. I thought I was going back to the 1880s to make up this meeting. But yeah, and there are songs I have in my file, some songs strictly about Rotary, you know, written for Rotary.
Mm-hmm. So the highlight of your year was then the Art Wickens
right, the establishment of what we know today as the Community Service Award, awarded by the Rotary Club of Tacoma with the participation of all the other Rotary clubs in Pierce County, because that's one thing that I wanted to also guarantee would be too strong. But anyway, the involvement of the other clubs, since Tacoma is the major club in Pierce County, let's get all of them involved. And then there was a thing that I was very adamant about, and that was to show our good faith and how we feel about community service. I felt that it would be community service on our part to declare that any member of our club would be ineligible for the award. There were some members who were very upset about it, but my reason was that if we left it open to Rotarians, what you would have is the politics of human nature, because Rotarians are so well known for their community service to begin with, you'd just be passing it around within the club. And I felt the message was, the mission was to get out and recognize those not involved in Rotary, and particularly at that time, you know, many women were doing great things in the community. Here would be a way to recognize them.
So was this the first time that award was given?
Yes, at that night we gave it to Art.
During your year, and that's
Right.
when it all began?
That's when it all began.
And I also know that, didn't you begin the Tacoma Rotary Foundation, the art?
No, that was begun by William R. Gregory.
Okay, great.
Yeah, Bill Gregory, he was the prime mover of that. Like any other president, I just helped to move it along, you know, from the standpoint of getting money for the corpus. But no, that was Bill's great idea, and once again, he just thought the world of art, and it was in those days known as the Arthur H. Wickens Foundation of the Rotary Club of Tacoma.
Well, Buck was putting all of the accolades at your feet for that.
No, that's totally an error. Totally no. Bill Gregory is the guy who deserves the credit for that.
But you must have done something to help it along.
Well, I've been somewhat involved in fundraising over the years. I, chaired the United Way campaign for 2 years, and I was on a couple of campaigns to St. Joe's Hospital, and I could go on with a lot of other things. So, yeah, I had done a lot of fundraising. So, to really help the Arthur H. Wickens Foundation along was just a natural for me. So that's why I took a great deal of interest.
It's almost at $1 million now. What was your goal back then?
Well, the early goal was just to try and get to $100,000 as quickly as possible, but I'm sure at some point somebody said, well, once we get to that 100,000, then the million is right around the corner. So, accolades to a lot of people, and great credit that, the corpus is now over $1 million. Just great.
Well, when did you become district governor? How long after you were president?
About 9 years later, yeah. About 9 years later, I remember I got a call from the president of the Rotary Club of Tacoma, who wanted to submit my name to the district nominating committee. And of course, I was so busy in my industry affairs with the National Automobile Dealers Association and the charitable foundation in NADA that I really had not been involved in the district. And so I said, well, let me give it some consideration. So I said, all right, you can submit my name. So I went up to Victoria for the interview, and there were, 3 or 4 of us were candidates at that time. And so anyway, I got a call later that night from a fellow who became a great friend of mine, who was a former district governor, and he told me that I had been selected by the committee. So that's how I got involved for a couple of years in the district. But Ev Landon, I wish Ed were alive today, but Ev Landon was a past district governor of 5020, and he was just such a prince of a man, and he and Art had something special being, past district governors. And I always remember my year as president, I would always give proper recognition to Ev, as well. We have with us today past district governor Ev Landon. So after one meeting, Ev came up to me and he said, say, Bob, he said, I wonder if I could ask a favor. Oh yeah, sure, Ev, what is it? And he said, could you kind of not put so much emphasis on the past? So from that point on, I always called Ev former district governor Ev Landon. Wonderful guy.
You mentioned friends. Who were your good friends throughout your Rotary history in Tacoma Rotary?
Well, my closest friends were Art Wickens and Bill Gregory, and then there were just a lot of other friends. I mean, so many wonderful men, and all the past presidents that I got to know well and became friendly with them. Just so many great people. That was the beauty of it.
Did you travel to conventions and like California?
Well, I went, as a district governor, I was required to go to the national convention or international convention, and that year, of my year as president of the Rotary Club of Tacoma, was Dallas, in Dallas, Texas. And then, of course, when I was the district governor, I may have mixed that up a little bit. When I was district governor, I'm trying to remember where the international convention, oh, I know. It was the year I was district governor that the international convention was in Dallas, Texas. And the year I was president, I think it was at a location that I think it was over in the Far East or someplace that I just didn't have the time to go to the convention. But when I was district governor, it was mandatory. That was one thing they told you, if you're serious about being a candidate, you realize that you must attend, you shall attend the international convention. So that year, Dallas, and for the council and legislation, where as a district governor you had to bring all the credentials, the various votes you had for things to do with legislative activity at the international convention. I'll never forget this one fellow. I'm going up to the credentialing desk, and I introduce myself as the district governor of 5020, and I have all these authorizations from the clubs in my district who are not represented, but they shall be represented by my presentation of their ballots. So this man proceeds to go through every ballot, and he found one that was not signed. I will never forget, Don, he looked at me like it was the greatest sin in the world. And at first I thought he was, being a little facetious. So I sort of went along with it. Then I realized that he was deadly serious. And finally, to convince him that I knew that this was legitimate, I said, well, why don't we start with something that we all know in Rotary? Let's start with the 4-way test. I said, the president of this club happens to work at the CPA firm that I deal with personally and business-wise. I know the man is an honorable man. I can call him on the phone right now. Yes, I feel badly he forgot to sign it, but I know it's legitimate. He accepted it.
Oh, and again, you wiped your brow.
Yeah, right.
One more question about Art Wickens. I hear stories that when somebody was proposed and they're supposed to be doing so much percentage for their classification type of work, he would make sure, standing outside watching, see how much business they did, or is any of that true? It'd be like almost a private eye Art Wickens, or?
Well, I don't know that Art was that precise. I know that, and I became one, he would be regarded as a strict constructionist of the Constitution. But I don't think he went to that degree, but I do know that he certainly, through committee work, there was investigation into the characters of people who were proposed.
I also understand that he was opposed to drinking at any type of Rotary event.
Oh yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Art was a great teetotaler, and he did not believe in it, and his beliefs carried on, and of course, with all due respect, the president's only president 1 year, so where you don't have any longevity, sometimes you just can't change things that quickly. But yeah, he was opposed to drinking, and therefore there was none.
Could we just go through, I'll give you a couple names and you give me your reaction and so forth.
Sure.
About them. We've already mentioned R. Franklin Thompson, one of my favorite people. How about a name that keeps coming up? I forget his first name. Kniesel? supposed to have been a lot of fun.
Kiesel.
Kiesel.
Yeah. Yeah, I only knew of him through my dad, but he was not in the club when I was president because I certainly would have known him well because of my father. My dad was a great player at the Elks Club with Kiesel and a few other men. Corning Todd was one guy who was a wonderful, warm individual in our club, and he was just a fantastic guy. I'll never forget. We were honoring Myers, Paul Myers, who was known as the Old Goat because he was, for many years, the city ticket agent for the Great Northern Railway. And all my years in college, going from here to Chicago on the train would always be in the Great Northern. So, you know, my dad always got the ticket from Paul, and they were great friends. So when I came into the club, we had something rather automatic. Well, Paul was a great one for sending out birthday cards. He just kept doing this, you know. It was kind of his tradition. So the year that he that I was president, I thought, well, why don't we do something special to recognize Paul Myers? So what I did was I got this wood carving. There's a great wood carver in Tacoma by the name of Art McKellips, who had done a lot of work for me and had really done some wonderful things in the community. So I went to Art and I said, could we do something, you know, an old goat here and the railroad and all this and that. So we presented it at a meeting to Paul Myers, and on the back I had all these pictures. I went to the club and did a mailing and had on the back, and the reverse of the wood carving were all these pictures of presidents like Grant, Lincoln, Jefferson, and what have you. And so then we presented that to Paul and turned it over. Well, one of the guys we involved in presenting this, and of course I didn't know the history at that particular point, but anyway, I called in Corning Todd to get involved in the presentation. I'll never forget, Corning got up and he said, boy, this is really something to involve me in presenting something to Paul Myers. He's a guy who beat me for president. But I mean, there was just that good fellowship and fun that, you know, the members have, and a lot of beautiful memories.
Joe Gordon Sr.
Oh.
What was he like as a younger man?
Well, Joe was just that strong, dynamic individual that he always was, you know, and he's truly the embodiment of when Joe spoke, everybody listened. Yeah, he was just so highly regarded and such a great man and wonderful attorney, and yeah, no, they've always admired Joe.
Okay, how about Bill Leake?
Well, Bill Leake, he just added to the whole atmosphere of the club, you know, and he loved to, you know, try and catch a president with some faux pas or whatever. You know that, Don, yourself. But yeah, Bill was a guy who truly loved Rotary, and he did a lot of things for the club, a lot of things in the community. He got very involved over at the federal penitentiary, and someday, if you ever want to hear a great story, it was my early days in Rotary, and the meeting's over, and Bill came up to me and he said, say, Bob, I understand that you were over at the SIG program at McNeil. And that kind of threw me, and I said, well, yes. And he said, well, that was great. Well, the SIG program at McNeil Island Federal Penitentiary at that time was the self-improvement group. And I knew a chaplain at McNeil, and he's the one who got me involved. And he wanted me to come over as a businessman and talk to all the prisoners there. And he told me about SIG, self-improvement group. He said every Saturday we bring somebody in and they talk about their vocation, walk of life, or whatever, and to be informative to the men who are incarcerated there. And so I said, well, sure, I'll be happy to do it. So I told him, well, maybe I'll talk in what I had as a project when I was in college entitled The Mechanics of Creative Thinking. And that was one of the most interesting experiences in my lifetime. Well, anyway, because of that experience, now Bill Leak, after a Rotary meeting, is asking me about any further involvement. And I said, well, I really don't anticipate that I'll be involved. He said, well, what about in the prisoner release program when men are willing to get out? Or when they're scheduled to be released from prison, would you be involved in maybe helping them with the job? And I said, well, yeah, I'm inclined to be helpful to people. You know, they paid their debt to society, so why not give them a chance? And that is one of the most stirring stories in my memory, was the guy I was trying to be helpful to. And someday, as Paul Harvey would say, you'll have to hear the rest of the story.
Well, tell us the rest of the story.
Well, Bill came back to me a few meetings later, and he said, there is this fellow who's scheduled to be released. And I wonder if maybe you could find him a job at the dealership. And I said, well, gee, Bill, you know, as I told you, if I can be of help, I'll try. And I said, well, I want you to understand something, Bill. I will not be the one to interview him. I'll have the manager of the department where he's going to possibly work be the one, and it will be his decision, not mine. So we're leaving. And I turned and I said, Bill, how long has he been in prison? He said, well, he's been in about 20-some years. And when I heard that, I said, 20-some years? My golly, what was he sent up for? Well, he wasn't involved. He was only the driver of the car. But what it was a kidnapping. I heard that. I already made a commitment that we'll interview the guy. I'm driving from the Winthrop Hotel, the Crystal Ballroom, to my office thinking, my young children, this guy was involved in a kidnapping. You know, all these thoughts run through your mind. So I went out and I got these two managers, because, you know, like good interrogation they have in the movies, you know, one talks and the other observes. I said, now, I want you to interview this guy. There's no reason to go into any details other than I want you to objectively assess whether or not this guy would be able to do the job here. So they interviewed him and came back to me a couple of days later and said, you know, really, we don't have a place for this guy. I don't know what he's been doing, but he really can't do anything. I said, well, that's fine, that's fine. So I told Bill at the next Rotary meeting that it just didn't work out. So a few weeks later, it's got to be, I'm driving home from the Rotary Club of Tacoma Thursday meeting, and I turned on the radio. And this fellow was talking very quietly. And he said, well, of course, they're winding through out on the highway, and the Pierce County Sheriff's cars are in pursuit, as well as the Washington State Patrol, and now they're getting closer to the Pierce-Thurston County border, where the Thurston County Sheriff's Office will pick up the caravan of cars following this car. And what happened was the branch manager of the Puget Sound National Bank at 38th and South Tacoma Way had just been kidnapped because of this robbery that took place. And so he's in the car having been kidnapped by these guys. The next day, on the front page of the paper is the picture of this guy driving the car, and he was the fellow we had interviewed and said we didn't have a place for him.
And what did you say to Bill Leak after this?
When I saw Bill the following Thursday at a Rotary meeting, I can see him yet. He just shook his head and was looking down. We didn't have to say a word to each other.
That would be something to see Bill Leak.
Speechless. Yeah, he was absolutely speechless.
Oh. Okay, let's go. Archie McLean.
Oh, Archie was a wonderful fellow, and Larry Gillarducci, is such a good buddy of Archie. He could really tell you about Archie, but yeah, he was a fine Rotarian and a great man. Yeah.
And who did you bring into the club? Remember any people that you brought into the club?
I brought in a great friend of mine. He was a high school roommate of mine, and James Dennis Thomas Kavanaugh. Jim Kavanaugh in those days of Kavanaugh Lumber Company. Yeah, Jim became a really great Rotarian, still involved in Rotary, and then as his career changed, he's been in about 2 or 3 other Rotary clubs, president of one. I think he was president of Woodinville when he was up there for a while, but yeah, good Rotarian. And then a couple other people.
And what was your favorite year in Rotary?
Well, I don't know if I had so many favorite, or a particular favorite year, other than the year that I was president. I just enjoyed that thoroughly. But one of my favorite years had to be the year I was program chairman for then President Ed Hudson. And you ask Ed Hudson about his year as president of the Rotary Club of Tacoma, and he'll tell you the great programs we had. We really had some outstanding programs and a lot of fun, because I hooked up with Seattle knowing that they'd get some big name people, so I got to know the program chairman over there, and I said, hey, as they're coming out here, ask them if they've got any additional time. You meet on Wednesday, have them come over to Tacoma on Thursday. So we were able to put together some really interesting programs.
Anything else you would like to share about Rotary? What would you tell young men or women these days why they should join Rotary?
Well, I gave a talk to a Rotary Club in New Mexico some years ago, and I entitled it The 2 Great C's of Rotary. And the 2 great C's to me are classification and creativity. And when you put those together, the things that result are really very exciting. And I think if anybody is inclined to be creative, wants to serve, wants to get involved, I would encourage them most enthusiastically to get involved in Rotary, because you really can see the results of your efforts. And as I said earlier, the great thing about Rotary is it's such a cross-section of the leadership of any community. If you want to get something promulgated in a hurry, known, and accomplished, Rotary's the avenue.
So you must have been really aghast when they virtually did away with classifications.
Oh yeah, very much so. Yeah. I'm of the old school. I will admit that. Yeah, I will admit that.
And how about women in the club?
Well, I think women are fine. That's just great, and they offer a certain vitality. But yeah, human nature is human nature. I'm of an age when women liked some of their clubs, and we liked our clubs, and sure, it's a little bit different than what I'm used to, but I think it's just great. So many women are doing great things in Rotary.
And anything you'd like to add that we haven't talked about?
No, I can't think of anything. I would probably go off on a tangent. Yeah. I'll tell you one great story, talking about fellowship and what have you, that I have in the early tapes, or on these tapes with Art Wickens about the early days, and of course the days before the Narrows Bridge, and to get over to Gig Harbor, was a ferry trip. Well, anyway, we were trying to sponsor a club over in the Gig Harbor area, and at the same time, there really wasn't a basis for it, but we were trying to have Rotary over their show